Thank you. As Stephen said, my name's Paul. I think I know most of you. If not, it's nice to have you here. We're going to be in Luke chapter 16 for our talk today. Just to give you a heads up, I know several of you are new. You've not been here before. And so the way we kind of do church around here is we sing a song, we have announcements, why moments, and then somebody like me stands up and tries to talk about, explain a passage in the Bible. And I hope what I do today is educational, it kind of explaining, talking through it. I hope it's not preaching messagey. It may be. But we're in the process of studying a passage in Luke that are referred to as the Lucan parables. We're in chapter 16, and that section goes from 10 to 19. And a parable is a story that Jesus told that had a lot of different meanings and a lot of different truths that can be learned from the story. It's not just here's this, do that. And so the idea with a parable is it's a deeper meaning story that in relationship you get to understand a lot of the content, and it can be applied in a lot of different ways. I struggled with whether to do this, but I'm going to. So today's study brings us to two parables that a lot of the books that I've read about those parables say these are the hardest parables Jesus taught. And so because of that, I want to give you an option. And I struggle because there's a lot of you that are new. Some of you have never been here before. And I don't want you to think, oh, this guy's crazy, I'm going to run out. I mean, he is crazy, but that's a whole different subject. But I want to start in the middle of Luke chapter 16 and read a verse. Luke chapter 16, verse 14 says, the Pharisees were lovers of money, heard all these things, and they ridiculed him. All of these people heard what Jesus said and made fun of what they heard. So I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to give you a get out of jail free card, and then I'm going to pray, and then we're going to jump into what Jesus taught. If you don't want to hear what Jesus taught today, now's your chance to get up and leave. All right? Just sneak out, because the truth that Jesus taught today that I'm going to talk about is hard to hear. And I've been reading this chapter just about every day for the last 3 weeks, and it doesn't get any easier. So with that said, this is your get out of jail free card. I'm going to pray, and then while I'm praying, if you want to sneak out around all the people, just follow the wet footprints. You can get out, and then we're going to jump into Luke chapter 16. So let's pray. Jesus, thank you for the Bible that you gave us. Thank you that you care enough about us to give us a roadmap that leads us to a relationship with you. And thank you that that roadmap is not just a start and a destination, but a friend that walks with us every step of the way from the beginning to the end and carries us into eternity. And help what I say today to be pleasing to you, and help the truths that we share today to not only be heavy and hard, but to be encouraging and to be helpful. And help everyone here today to know that they're loved by you, no matter where they are or where they came from or where they're going, but that your love surpasses all things. In your name we pray, amen. All right, let's begin. Luke chapter 16, verse 1. A lot of the parables that Jesus taught were in response to a question. Somebody would ask a question like, what temperature do I cook the chicken? And rather than Jesus saying, you cook the chicken at 350, Jesus would say, well, let's talk about the oven, and let's talk about where the oven is and how do you prepare things. And he gives you all of this content. It's like, Jesus, I just wanted to know the temperature. But Jesus gives this big story. But we come to Luke chapter 16 and there's no question. Jesus just starts giving these parables. So what does that tell us? These are probably important things that Jesus wanted to know. He wasn't waiting on someone to be curious. He wanted to present this information. So Luke chapter 16, verse 1, we meet two different people. Verse 1 and 2, he said to the disciples, there was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was wasting his possessions. And he called him and said to him, What is this that I hear about you? Turn in the account of your management, for you can no longer be my manager. So we find two people. We find a rich man and a man that's handling his business. We're going to use the word steward today a lot. This man was a manager or a steward. He was in charge of what this rich man had. You say, what's the obvious things we find out right there? One, that there's a rich man who's got enough wealth to pay somebody. One of the funniest things I've ever heard is by a guy that I like to listen to sometimes because he says funny things. Sometimes they're off color and objectionable, but that's neither here nor there. Charles Barkley was talking to his mom about being rich and being wealthy, and he was talking about people who come into the NBA and they think they have all this money. And Charles Barkley said, it's the difference between the front of the check and the back of the check. And one of these guys in the NBA said, what do you mean? He said, you're signing the back of that check, cashing it. But the guy that signed the front of that check, he's got a whole lot more money than you've got. I thought that was pretty good. So here you've got a rich man who's signing the front of the check. He's got a lot of money. And the guy signing the back of the check is working for him. He's the employee. The other thing we learn is there's an assumption of guilt. The rich man hears that this manager's not doing a very good job, and he just assumes he's guilty, right? He just comes to him and says, I've heard you're not managing what I've given you very well, and you're going to lose your job. So what does the manager do? Let's go down to verse 3 through 7 and see what he does. Verse 3, and the manager said to himself, what shall I do since my master is taking the management away from me? What's the first thing that the manager assumes? First, there's an assumption of guilt. And then what's the second thing? There's the acceptance of guilt. He does not try to defend himself. He does not say, well, wait a minute. Let me show you all the records I've kept. Let me show you what a good job I've done. What does he say? It's over. I've been caught. I've been found. Now what does he do after he recognizes that he's been found? I'm not strong enough to dig. I'm ashamed to beg. I've decided what I'll do, and when I am removed from management, people may receive me into their houses. So he comes up with a scheme. He comes up with a plan. He comes up with an idea of this is how I'm going to protect myself. He doesn't have any responsibility to the man that's been paying him. He doesn't have any remorse for, man, I've really screwed it up. What does he do? He goes 100% into self-preservation. I've got to figure out a way how I'm going to survive this. And what's his plan to survive it? Summoning his master's debtors, one by one, he said to them, how much do you owe my master? He said, 100 measures of oil. He said to him, take your bill, sit down quickly, and write 50. Then he said to another, how much do you owe? And he said, 100 measures of wheat. And he said to him, take your bill and write 80. So what does he do? He's already been caught for mismanaging the master's money. He decides to quickly try to preserve face. What does he do with the master's debt? He leverages what wasn't his to protect himself. Isn't that wild? Isn't it wild to think that an employee is caught mismanaging what they were given, and they leverage the mismanagement to have a safety net for a soft landing? How many of you work with people like that? Don't raise your hand, because some of you work together. That's crazy, isn't it? You don't know what's even crazier than that? Let's read the next verse. Verse 8. Find the number 8. The master commended the dishonest manager for his shrewdness. So let me get this straight. The master shows up and he's going to fire the manager for mismanagement. The manager who realizes he's caught, he's been mismanaging, he's going to get fired. He leverages what's owed the master to protect himself. The master sees all this and sees how his debt that he's owed, the fortune that he has, is being wasted. And what does he do to the guy who's wasting it? He commends him for his shrewdness. What does that tell you about the master? How did he get his wealth? He probably wasn't the most honest master, was he? Isn't that crazy? It's crazy to think that here's a boss who finds a guy mismanaging his money, threatens to fire him. The guy mismanaging the money uses this mismanagement tactics to find a soft landing for himself so that he'll have friends to take care of him when he loses his job. The master sees all this and says, man, that was pretty clever. I like what you did right there. My mind can't comprehend that until I kind of look around at our culture. Because if you read the second half of this verse, something happens in the middle of verse 8. The parable stops and Jesus starts teaching. What happens in the middle of verse 8? The master commended the dishonest manager for his shrewdness, and then Jesus makes this statement. The sons of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than the sons of light. What does it mean when Jesus said that people are more shrewd in this generation and how they deal in business than with the sons of light? What's the comparison between the two? Come on. Is Theo going to tell me what to say next?
They put out more effort. They care more about it.
They cared more about making these greenbacks than in this. Is that what Jesus said? I read a commentary. I told you this is kind of heavy stuff. I'm sorry. It's what Jesus said, not what I'm saying. I read a commentary, and I've heard this a lot. And I have examples of it. There are global business insignias that you can go around the world and purchase. I have in my possession Coke bottles in multiple languages. I've traveled internationally and bought Coke bottles with Coca-Cola written on them in different languages. Isn't it crazy to think that you can go in more places in this world and buy Coca-Cola than you can pick up a Bible? But the shrewdness of men, the business capacity of men, is more effective than what people do with the light. Now, what does Jesus continue to teach? Because he says some things in the next few verses that are just difficult to understand, explain, and accept. I'm glad that we had the baptism this morning, and I'm really glad that my friend Shane was here. You know why I'm glad? Because sometimes I say sarcastic things that people don't always understand sarcasm. And I joked once that I was going to beat Shane up, and people thought I was serious. I mean, if you've met Shane and met me, does anybody in this room think that I could even get a punch in? Shane would break me in half. We've been friends for a long time. We've seen each other through a lot of different things. But verse 9 in Luke 16 feels a lot like how I talk a lot of times. I'm not saying Jesus was sarcastic, but this verse doesn't make any sense. Let's read verse 9 and see if Jesus is as sarcastic as I would like to think he is. I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of unrighteous wealth, so when it fails, they may receive you into eternal dwellings. Make friends for yourselves by unrighteous wealth. Cheat people out of money. So when it all fails, they can provide you an eternal home. That 1 and 1 doesn't make 2, does it? What's Jesus saying? I think Jesus is illustrating what he said about how effective people are at business dealings and how fleeting it is. There's a line in the movie Princess Bride, and I don't know if I can quote it exactly, but they think the guy's dead, and he says, "Oh, he's most sincerely dead." Huh? He's mostly dead. Mostly dead. Princess Bride is one of those movies I've seen enough to kind of quote, but not really good. But when a man dies, what does he take with him? When a man is born, what does he bring with him? Okay, so the richest parent in the world who brings a baby in this world, the baby comes in carrying hundreds, and the poor people come in. No, every baby comes in with nothing. And we all leave with nothing. So what's Jesus saying? The efforting that these guys were putting into making money is not going to provide eternal homes. Let's look at the next lesson that Jesus teaches in verses 10 through 12. One who is faithful in very little is also faithful in much, and one who is dishonest in very little is also dishonest in much. If you then have not been faithful in the unrighteous wealth, who will entrust you with true riches? And if you have not been faithful in that which is another's, who will give you that which is your own? I assume I'm not alone in this. But I've often thought, man, if I could just make a little bit more money, then things would be perfect. If I could just get a raise at work, just a few more dollars a week, just a little bit more. When I was a young man, I was making about $23,000 or $4,000 a year, a couple $1,000s a month. We were struggling. We were trying to keep things together. We had small children. And I had a conversation with somebody who was working for a gentleman who was making well over $100,000 a year. So 4 or 5 times what I was making. And I made the comment, man, it would be nice to make what he makes and not struggle, because he was driving a convertible Cadillac, owned multiple businesses, had a boat on the river and a big house. And you know what this guy was talking to who worked for that man said? He said, don't be fooled. He's struggling just as much as you're struggling because he doesn't manage his money. So he had boats and cars and just bigger bills. So the issue is not how much you have, it's how well you steward or how well you manage what you have. What's the next thing that Jesus teaches in verse 13? No servant can serve 2 masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. And this is what I put in my notes. Devotion is not a multitask dynamic. Devotion is not a multitask dynamic. You can't be devoted to one thing and chase something else. So I'll leave that there. Let's go to the next parable, because it's so much better. It's a whole lot easier and lighter. Go down to verse 19 and let's read about Lazarus and the rich man. Lazarus and the rich man. There was a rich man who was clothed in purple and fine linen, and who fasted scrumptiously every day. And at his gate was a poor man named Lazarus, covered with soils, who desired to be fed with that which fell from the rich man's table. Moreover, even the dogs came and licked his sores. So this whole passage, this whole parable is a contrast, a comparison between a very rich man and a very poor man. Pretty applicable to this town, right? In this town, you can see a Cybertruck driving around that are not cheap. And you can see people covered up under blankets sleeping every night because they have nowhere to live. Just like what's described here. A very wealthy man who lived scrumptiously and a very poor man who had nothing. I want to point out, because there's sometimes things in the Bible that we relate to things that are normal to us. And in this passage, it says that the dogs came and licked his sores. I want to make sure that we understand that dogs used in the Bible is not your fluffy, cuddly animal that comes and curls up on the couch with you. Dogs in the Bible were not domesticated pets. They were stray scavengers. It would be the essential of you going tonight and saying, ooh, let's let the possums come and lick my sores. Sorry for people who that hits close to home. Yeah. Right? A friend of ours posted a picture on Facebook this week of an animal he caught in a cage in a building, and Renee said, what is that? I said, I don't know. Looks a little bit like a possum, but the body's not big. It was a squirrel. But it was a mangy, nasty-looking squirrel. Hair was all standing. You don't want those things licking you. What's the next comparison? The poor man died and was carried by the angels to Abraham's side. Now remember, we're talking in parables. This is not a literal story of a literal man. This is a parable, right? The angels don't come and carry you to Abraham's side when you die, I don't believe. But in comparison, what happens to the rich man? The rich man also died and was buried. No one carried him anywhere. And in Hades, or in hell, being in torment, he lifted up his eyes, saw Abraham far off and Lazarus by his side. So what's the comparison here? The poor man died. He was carried by angels to Abraham's side. What is the assumptive truth that we should believe about Lazarus? Say that louder. Went to heaven. He had faith. Someone, I believe the example here is Jesus, God. Someone outside of Lazarus, the poor man, cared for him, so was watching him when he died and carried him into the presence of Abraham. Went to heaven. The rich man died and was buried. There was no heavenly figure monitoring his life, ready to care for him upon death. He just went to hell. He immediately went to torment. So what happens after he goes to torment? Change my notes, please. Go down to verse 23. In Hades, being in torment, he lifted up his eyes, saw Abraham afar off and Lazarus by his side. And he called out, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am anguished in this flame. What's he immediately do when he gets there? Begs for mercy. You know what a lot of rich people don't beg for? Mercy. You know why? Because if you got money, buy what you need. I don't need your pity or your mercy. I can just go buy it. I don't need that. Sorry to tell you, everybody needs mercy, right? So what is the response from Abraham? Abraham said, Child, remember that you in your lifetime received your good things, and Lazarus in like manner received bad things, but now he is comforted here, and you are in anguish. Another comparison. In life, the rich man had everything he wanted. Lazarus had nothing he wanted. In death, Lazarus had everything the rich man wanted, and the rich man had nothing that he wanted. So what's the rich man's response to that? He said, I beg you, Father, verse 26, besides all this, there's a gulf between us, I'm skipping verses. Verse 26, besides all this, between us, there is a great chasm that has been fixed, and in order that those could not pass from here to you may not be able to, and none may cross from there to here. And he said, this is his next request. I beg you, Father, to send Lazarus to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, so that he may warn them, lest they also come to this place of torment. But Abraham said, they have Moses and the prophets, let them hear them. And he said, no, Father, please. Abraham, if someone goes to them from the dead, they will repent. What was his priority when he was in torment? First, he wanted comfort. He wanted someone to dip his dip their finger in and give him a drop of water. Can you imagine being tormented in fire and you think one drop of water is going to comfort that? It's crazy. But then where does his focus shift? His brothers. What was not mentioned at the beginning of this story about the rich man? Nothing about his family. Didn't care about his family. But now all of a sudden his whole perspective and priority changed, right? Oh, warn my brothers. He also has some failed logic, right? He thinks because what was available for him to hear when he was there to listen was not effective for him, that somebody rising from the dead would be effective and would change that, right? Send somebody from the dead. What does Abraham respond in the end? And he said to him, if they do not hear Moses and the prophets, neither will they be convinced if someone should rise from the dead. So Abraham rejects the second plea. It's not going to help to send somebody from the dead. It's not going to be effective. There's a lot that's not told in that story that we could make assumptions and try to read stuff into it. I'm not going to do that today. What I would like to do, see how much time I've got left. What I would like to do is go back to both of these parables and ask the question, what does God want us to learn? Because I think there are some truths about both of them that would be helpful to us. If you don't mind, would you go back, or would you go to 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 2? In the first parable on management and stewardship, let's talk about the idea of being a steward or being a manager. What does God want us to learn about being a steward? 1 Corinthians 4:2, moreover it is required of stewards that they be found faithful. What does it mean to be faithful? To be consistent, to be dependable, to be trustworthy, to be accountable, to be honest. Was the manager listed in this parable any of those things? No. You know why? Doesn't tell us why. But the rich man he was working for was likely also not those things, because he praised his shrewdness. What's the next thing that we should learn? Now, we all have things that we are able to steward. And we can go a lot of different directions with things that we should have stewardship about. But as I studied this, one thing kept coming to my mind, and it's the thing that all of us have the exact same amount of. So it's not money, because some people in here have lots of money and some of us have very little money, right? What's the one thing that everybody has the exact same amount of? Time. How much do you get? How much do you get? 24 hours every day. Don't raise your hand, because I'm going to raise both of mine. How many of you in the last 7 days have said this sentence? I'm just too busy. Now, I can't answer why you're busy, and you can't answer why I'm busy. But how busy we are is 100% a function of what? The choices we make. I choose what time to go to bed. I choose what time to get up. One of the favorite things that happens in my house is for the alarm to go off multiple times every morning, because one of the people that listens to the alarm is too lazy to turn it off. Other people in our house wake up with no electronic device to wake them up, and they wake up cheerful and happy. And some people like me hear that alarm and snooze it and snooze it. I have alarms set at intervals, so the snooze goes off a minute after each other. It's glorious. Snooze, 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 snooze. Other people in my house hate that because they wake up cheerful and chipper, and I don't. A couple of things about time. How I steward my time shows what I value most. We all have 24 hours to separate it out. If you sleep 8 hours a day, then you've got 16 waking hours to choose what to do. Most people in here, I can't say everybody in here because I know at least one person in here doesn't. Most people in here have an electronic device that will track their screen time, that they carry with them all the time. And I'll confess, I am a terrible manager of my screen time. I was reviewing my notes, studying for this morning, trying to get all of my thoughts together, and I kept picking this thing up because I had notes on it. And as I'd pick it up and look at my notes, there were other things like, oh, you don't need to do that, idiot. You're trying to get ready to talk. Don't open that app. You don't need to look at that. Is it objectionable? Is it bad? Is it harmful? No. But is it a waste of my time? Yes. I think Todd said something similar to this a few weeks ago, and if I misquote you or quote somebody different, correct me. My actions today demonstrate what I believe about the future. Did you say that? Something similar to that? What I do today is an example of what I believe about the future. That's tough to hear. Because as a young man, I thought I could eat whatever I wanted. And then I went to the doctor and they said, you're eating too much carbs and too much sugar and you're pre-diabetic. And you know what I said? I don't believe you. And you know what 57-year-old me says? He was right. But what I do today says a lot about what I believe about tomorrow, right? I have a goal to live to be 90. I don't know if I'll make it, but that's my goal. I want to live to be 90. I want to be a grumpy old man. Not just a grumpy man. I want to be a grumpy old man. But I'll never get there if I don't change my habits today, will I? And then the last question about stewardship and time. Chapter 16, verse 1. There was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was wasting his possession. And he called him and said to him, what is this I hear about you? So here's my question about the 24 hours that you'll spend on January the 18th, 2026. When stewarding of time is questioned, how will you respond? I sat on the end of the couch the other night, and I had not had my phone in my hand for several hours because it had been sitting charging. I sat down and immediately picked it up. And my wife and I had talked, and we had decided we're not going to sit on the couch with our phone in our hand and set a bad example for our daughter. We're going to sit and be together. And she said, what are you doing on your phone? And what was my response? I haven't been on it for hours. But I'd forgotten that I'd made a commitment I wasn't going to do that. So when my stewardship is questioned, how do I respond? So then the next parable, what can we learn about the parable about Lazarus? The first question that comes to mind comes from verse 19. Will you go back to Luke 16:19, Stephen? Luke 16:19 says, sorry, not 19, I said wrong. 16. The law and the prophets were until John. Since then, the good news of the kingdom of God is preached. When the rich man was stewarding his time and his treasures around Lazarus, Did he care? There was someone in close proximity to him. Did he care anything about what that guy had? Not a thing. Not a thing. The second question to learn: when the rich man realized his torments, his urgency to steward was too late. What has God given you to steward that you don't want to lose the opportunity to steward? We have an interesting dynamic in our home. We have 3 adult children, and we have a 7th grader. God gave us the privilege of a little almost 2-year-old girl coming to live with us the month after our youngest of our older 3 kids graduated high school. So we get the opportunity to parent a second time. It's glorious. It's glorious. Doing 7th grade math for homework is one of the highlights and joys of my day. That was sarcasm. I have multiple friends who have multiple friends who have small children. Say that correctly. And I think to a person, I've told all of you, sleep every chance you get. Was I wrong? Sleep every chance you get, because guess what happens when you have small children? The chance to sleep goes away. You know what happens when those kids graduate high school? Your chance to spend time with them goes away. Mitch is back there shaking his head. Now, eventually someday you get grandkids and you get the opportunity to do stuff with them, but the first 18 years of a kid's life, you spend more time with them than you will the rest of their life. So don't miss what God's given you to steward today that you'll look back on with regret. Go back to verse 16. Jesus proclaimed, the good news of the kingdom of heaven has been proclaimed. I like to read from the CSB, and the CSB's title says it this way: everyone is urgently invited to enter it. And I think the thing to take away from the parable about Lazarus and the rich man, Lazarus had something the rich man didn't have. And if the rich man had been compassionate to Lazarus, he may have realized that Lazarus had a faith that could impact him. At the end of chapter 16, Jesus finishes it with, if they don't hear Moses and the prophets, neither will they be convinced if someone comes from the dead. So Jesus makes this statement that the gospel has come. And then he makes a statement at the end of the parable that people already have everyone or every witness that they can get. And so I want to make a second comparison. The first comparison is we all get the same thing every day. We all get 24 hours of time. What's the greatest gift that you have? What's the greatest treasure that you get to steward? Having kids is a great thing to steward. Being a parent is a wonderful, wonderful thing. Watching your children grow and become mature, capable adults is awesome. Stewarding your marriage relationship is fabulous. Watching that relationship grow is great. Stewarding well at a job and watching your company make money and your boss come to you with a bonus and say, hey, you did really good this quarter. You've made a lot of money for our company. Here's some extra money. Those things are awesome. It's great to do a good job and feel the reward of, man, I did a good job and I appreciate it. But what's the greatest thing we have to steward? I'll submit to you, if you go back to what Jesus said about the shrewdness of business people in comparison to the children of light, the greatest thing we have to steward is the gospel. And in context of being in church and studying these parables, there is nothing greater than the relationship that Jesus gives us with the Father through salvation. We call that the gospel. If you don't have a relationship with Jesus, today is a great day to understand what that means. Talk to Todd, talk to Stephen, talk to me, talk to anybody here who's a Christ follower. We can help you understand what that's like. But if you are a Christ follower, it's not a start and an end. I don't believe that following Jesus is a certificate that when I get to heaven, I can show him my paper and say, look, you said I could get in here. Here's my admission ticket. I think the gospel is a daily relationship with God. Do I get up every day and invest my time and my energy and my talent and my treasures in what God wants me to invest in? And so I ask that question. If you're a Christ follower, are you stewarding the gospel well? We steward the gospel well here in what we call discipleship groups. It can be one-on-one. It can be a group of 2 or 3. It can be a group of 5 or 10. But practicing the gospel together through relationship is the most effective way to follow Jesus. I think I'll say this correctly. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. I want to go far, so I want to go with people. I despise getting out of bed early. It is my least favorite thing in the world, bar none. A comfortable bed under the covers is a wonderful, wonderful thing. But because I want to go far in both my relationship with God and in my relationship with my wife, I set the alarm every Saturday morning and try real hard to get out of bed when it goes off and not hit snooze. Because I have a commitment to get up and have coffee with my wife and spend time with her. Because I want to go far. Where would I like to be on Saturday mornings? Renee can answer that question. In the bed. But because of my commitment, it's important to spend time together. So, these parables are hard. It's hard to hear questions about how you steward things. And it's hard to hear questions about how you steward the gospel in relation to the people around you. Because there's people around me that I really don't want to interact with. But I wouldn't be here today if people around me didn't interact with me because of the gospel. And I'll guarantee you, if you're honest with yourself, you wouldn't be here today if someone didn't interact with you because of the gospel. So then the question is, who isn't here today? Who could be here today? Who God's put near us? But we're not efforting to steward well. Stephen's got some questions for us. My wife read these and said, ooh, that's tough. I'll tell you, they are tough because following Jesus is not easy. Is it worth it? Yes, but it's not easy. So here's the questions. What we do for those of you that are new, we have a few minutes of discussion either at the table you're at or the people you're sitting around. And you can discuss any of these, all of these, pick whatever you want. When my stewarding of time is questioned, how do I respond? Who is in proximity to me that I could befriend for the cause of the gospel? What has God taught me today that I am now responsible to steward better? Thanks for being here.